Welcome back to lecture 1, part 2. So in part 1, we just gave a very quick background of what the module is about and also the assessment. So what I want to start doing now is to move forward and actually start talking about how we might gather background information, how we might gather background data that will feed into our critical evaluation of a particular topic. And this is true for pretty much any topic. So whichever topic you choose as part of the assessment, or whatever you do in the future, where you have to do this thing, that the rules and the ideas that we talk about today, and in part 3 of this lecture, will stand you in good stead for doing that sort of work. Okay, so let's start off by talking about searching the literature. So over the course of this module, as it says here, what you search for will change because you'll get better at it, because you'll be more experienced, because you'll learn lessons. And I think, so what we're talking about here is we're assuming that you're entering a new field and you've been asked to search the literature and come up with some conclusions about that particular area. And as I said in part 1, that could be because you're carrying on at university doing a research project, or that you're working in industry and you want to delve down a bit deeper in what your competitors are doing, or what, in fact, universities are doing in there with research, to decide what the focus of your company's work should be in the future. So it isn't just for academics. This reviewing the literature is actually true for all of us these days. And of course, these days, potentially it's much easier than it was when I was a student. When I was a student, everything was done through the library, and you had to get papers ordered for you to get to see them. These days, because of the internet, things are much easier in some respects, because you can access material very quickly and very easily. The downside of that is you get swamped with the amount of literature, the amount of data that's out there, and you've got to be quite picky about which bits you should read and which bits you shouldn't read. And hopefully through the course of the next couple of lectures, we'll come up with some ideas that help you doing that. Okay, so let's start off with the idea that you've got a project that you're going to be doing, and where do you start? Where on earth do you start with that huge literature? So a good place to start is actually looking at review papers, and we saw that in part 1, and we'll have a look in a minute of a couple of review papers here. So the advantage of review papers is that somebody's done a lot of work for you. So they've already gone off, they've already read lots of papers, and they've condensed those papers into one article that they've written. And you would hope that they've done this properly, and you hope that they've been critical, so the things that we're going to be learning on this module, and that they've come back with some really good advice for you. As we'll see, that's not always the case, but that's what you would hope. But to start off with the review papers, I mean, that's where you should be starting, really, when you start a new subject. And so what review papers do is they capture the current state of the field. But I've put there in brackets a year old ? And the reason I've put that is because what typically happens when you publish a paper is you do the work, you send it into a journal, maybe into a reputable journal, and that what happens then is they send that paper out to a number of reviewers, and that takes time. And the reviewers are usually busy people. They won't do it immediately. It might take 2 or 3 months for them to do that. It comes back, then maybe they have some suggestions for you to change your article. So you change your article, you send it back in, they re-review it, and then it gets published. So actually, from the date that you wrote it, so the papers that you read up to that current period, to the date that it's actually published, could be up to a year. So actually, you've already missed a gap of papers that have been published in that year that won't be in this review article. So that's something to bear in mind when you do look at review articles. But if they're done properly, they summarize important contributions of these older papers. So we'll talk about newer papers a bit later, but just remember that it's looking backwards when you're reading these review papers. But what they should do is you should gain the context and understanding of the importance of where new contributions might be in the field. So I definitely recommend when you start the projects that you start looking at review papers. Okay, so here's a couple. So here's one talking about robot locomotion. So that's kind of a big topic. That's talking about everything. Okay, it says it's a review. Okay, it was a 2015 paper. So timescale wise, if your project was on robot locomotion, then I would say, yeah, 5 years, that's pretty good. So that's looking at potentially all the literature from 2015 back. Okay, maybe 2014, as I said, because it may have taken a year to get published. Okay, and if you read the abstract, what it talks about is a meticulous analysis. Sounds fantastic. Sounds exactly what you want if you want to be reading that field. Okay, and the second paper I just want to highlight is the one that we looked at in part 1. So if you remember, that was looking at legged robots. That was actually from 2011, so a bit older, probably still valid. And it doesn't talk about a meticulous review, but it says it reviews the literature of different types of optimization for legged robots, walking robots. So let me just come out of the presentation again. Stop sharing that one. Let me just share a couple of papers. So this is the first one. Okay, so this is the one that talks about robot locomotion, a review. So I think we would all agree that's a huge subject. Yeah, that's a huge subject. It tells you which journal it's in. It's in an OK journal. Okay, so yeah, this is the abstract we've already seen where it says in this paper a meticulous analysis. Okay. So again, I'll get you to read this in detail, but let me just highlight a few things just for you to think about. Okay, so it starts off with an introduction again, which is fine. And it says here at the end of the introduction, however, this survey is meant for the extensive study of existing robot designs. Extensive study. Remember, the main topic is robot locomotion. Okay, so it's quite a broad subject. So it says extensive study of existing robot designs and summarization of various issues that could affect these designs. Okay, so it starts off with walking, Gant, means how to walk, locomotion. Okay, remember this is an extensive study. It's a meticulous analysis. So we start off by talking about walking. And what it says is, okay, the limbs, at least at the end of this part, limb coordination results in accurate Gantt patterns, directional stability, and body posture configuration. Okay, is that telling us much? Is that telling us much? Is that being very critical about what people have done so far? Not sure. It then goes on to hopping and on one-legged robots. And what it says here, the plots between various attributes such as vertical position, joint torque, and joint angle were plotted against time, which concluded the development and the corrected action under unchanged boundary constraint conditions. Okay, so for me, this is telling us what the paper is, a summary of the paper. It's a summary of the work. But is it being very critical? Is it really helping us to decide where to go next? Okay, and again here, one of the important features of biped designs is that they can be like humans in dimension and attract interest in most researchers. Okay, is that very critical? Okay, I'm not going to go on for too long here because it's kind of the same thing. The thing I would say is the paper is about 12 pages long when you talk about the bulk, and we've got 35 references. Okay, 12 papers long, 35 references, and remember the grand topic is robot locomotion. So without knowing anything or not too much about the subject, do you think that's likely to cover everything? Okay, I'll leave that as a question for you to think about. Let me stop sharing that one and go back to this paper. Oh, sorry, wrong share. I've got too many things to share here. Yeah. Sorry about that. There we go, this paper. So this is the one we looked at in part 1. And if you remember with this paper, it's I would suggest it's different from the previous one, where if you remember, this talks about the main problem is about something. If we look at this one here, however, until now, the reduction in number of prototypes has been built on according to the results given by the study done so far. Furthermore, there is no commonly adapted solutions for optimization problem. Okay, I would suggest that there's more criticality in some of these statements, in some of these results. And this is a similar length paper to the previous one, but it's only looking at legged robots. If we go to the end, what do we find at the end? Okay, well, they're not actually numbered, but you can see, I think if we go here, we've got a set of references and then another page of references and another page of references and another one and a half a page. So there are significantly more than 34 references here. So this paper is more specific in its area. It appears to be more critical, but I'll leave that to you to decide when you read it. And it references a lot more papers. So that probably gives you an idea of different conclusions. But as I said, I will leave that for you to decide. Okay, if I can get myself sorted, we're now back to the presentation. Good. Okay, so we've had a look at these two papers very briefly. Okay, and I've tried to highlight some ideas about this. So what I want to do, what I want you to do, so this is an action for you for the first workshop that we're going to have. So I want you just to have a quick read of those two papers. I'll put them on the wiki so that you can access them on the wiki, or you may want to download them from the journals. But anyway, whichever way you want to do it, have a quick read of both of these papers and ask yourself some questions. So do they cover a good amount of the literature in their specific areas? And I know you're not going to be experts in these areas, so it's really for you just to get a feel, and then we'll discuss these. We'll discuss it in the workshop. Okay, do you think that they're being critical in their analysis, or is it just a list? Is it just this paper talks about this, this paper talks about this, this paper talks about this, and it's just a list just saying what the paper does, or are they being critical? Okay. Are the reviews systematic, or are they just kind of random? Is there a method to the way they list things and they talk about things, or is it just a random set of papers that you think that people have done? Okay. And then finally, what would your overall conclusions be, having read those papers about what a review paper should look like and how good they are? Okay, so these are a few things. Please do this before the workshop, because that's some of the stuff we're going to be doing in our first workshop. So please have a look at those two papers before we get to that. Okay, finally, I wanted to show you another video just to amuse you at the end of part 2. So this is some work done by these people down here. It shows you down here. That's published in this journal. And these people evolved walking robots since we talked about a couple of review papers talking about Gantt, about locomotion. I thought each other. So these are all evolved. And what this shows is different generations, so different parts as the evolution is happening. And what you'll see is early generations, they're really not very good. and they fall over. And the later generations, as it gets better, locomotion becomes much better. And I think that this video is well, it's kind of amusing. I find it quite amusing, but it's also interesting to show that evolution can actually work for something actually quite complicated, for something as complicated as two-legged walking. Right, that's the end of part 2. Part 3 will follow soon, carrying on the theme for this lecture. Okay, but for now, thanks very much, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.